Hi, I'm Liv. Join me as I ad-lib my way through stories from the vaults, unsolicited sarcasm, bewitching wisdom, and creative insight on how to become our greatest work of art. Here we will discover our wildest and most unscripted selves. Yes, that self, the one that was never meant to be tamed. Hi, welcome back to Adlib with Liv. I'm your host, Liv. I'm so excited to have you back here. Episode 2. It's a nice little follow-up to the intro, welcome to my podcast episode. And today we're going to dive into the meaning behind Adlib and the mantra that I came up with for this podcast, which is unscripted and untamed. So let me just set the scene for you. I'm in Mexico City. It's a rainy afternoon. The incense is lit. I've got all the lights going to create a nice ambiance in the home studio. And I have a nice hot cup of chamomile tea brewing. And what a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for joining me. So let's talk about Adlib with Liv. The framework of this podcast came from the idea that I wanted to give myself space to, for lack of a better term, shoot the shit, right? I just knew that I wanted to use my voice. I have some experience in radio hosting, and I've been interviewing people for 10 years since college when I was working on my college newspaper. And I've always been using my voice in a form for forms of communication, whether that's professionally or just loving, deep chats, long chats. I'm a voice note connoisseur. I have been known to send upwards of 15-minute long voice notes. Some of you might be shaking your head. Others will be giggling because those voice notes were for you. However you feel about voice notes is fine. But I have things to say, okay? And I like to get into the details. So I don't just respond with a cool, meet you there. I'm more like, what are we wearing? What's the vibe? How are you feeling? Let's do a check-in. If something is going on in someone's life, I want to dig into it. I want to know the details of how you feel. Also, if someone asks me a question, they know they're going to get a long-winded response. You know what? I'm going to reframe long-winded into meaningful and detailed. Okay? Let's just reframe that real quick. I like to share the details of things. In fact, that's kind of my storytelling style. It's also why I'm leaning more towards poetry these days, is because poetry to me is the it's distilled details. And so you get to just talk about the experience, the sensuality, the feelings of something rather than like taking someone through the beginning, middle, and end. I'm not so linear. You'll learn that through this podcast. But ad-libbing is like a way for me to honestly reframe some of the negative thoughts that I have about the way I process and the way that I share, because it can be lengthy and it can go and go and go. Someone's got to turn this mic off to shut me up. But I think there's something really beautiful in finding ways to move through all of that, like language and all of those thoughts that we have. That's why voice notes in a safe space are the best. You send it to people that are going to receive it well. So ad-libbing, love that meaning. It means to go off script. It means to take liberties where your instincts are. It means to, when it comes to music, an ad-lib is like literally taking a riff and just going off on, some little musical tangent, and it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the pre-written song or the pre-written chorus, or I don't know anything about music, but you know what I'm saying, tu sabes. And so for me, ad-libbing became more about how we go off script in our lives, because I believe that we have to give ourselves this space to go off script and to make choices that maybe didn't look the way they did yesterday, or maybe we give ourselves space to say or do something that just doesn't seem like us. In fact, I think that's where the magic lies, is going off script. Because what is the script? Who wrote the script? That's part of this interrogation here, is rewriting something that was written for us. Sometimes we're operating under a script that our parents wrote for us, and we're following the rules of what we were kind of told to do. We might be in our 30s doing this subconsciously. Most of us are in some capacity, because rewriting that script that was shown us is maybe a lifelong process, I might say. And it also has to do with rewriting the script that we create for ourselves. Out of survival, we create a narrative that makes sense and feels safe to us. That narrative might be going out in the world and getting a certain kind of career job. It might be meeting certain types of people and staying in line with that. It might mean, getting married and starting a family. So yeah, I want to invite this exploration of the script. Where are we staying on script in our lives? And where is there space for us to go off script and rewrite something and reframe something? Like part of my script is that I wanted to be single for a long time. That was actually really important to me. A lot of people might say, "Oh, like she's single." And I'm like, "It's by choice, okay?" Yes, I've tried my hand with many a man, but it also always has come back to me not wanting to actually have that work out. Like, I chose men that weren't available for a reason. So, again, another podcast for another rainy day. I love the mantra unscripted and untamed, because to me it means rewriting something, anything in our lives, rewriting the programming in our minds, the patterns in our habits. It means rewriting the way that we show up every day. And I think that when we rewrite our script, when we get kind of off the page of what we think we're supposed to do or what feels safe for us to be doing, we actually get closer to that untamed, wild person within us. If anyone has read this book called Women Who Run with the Wolves, and her name is Clarissa Pinkola Estes. She's phenomenal. I actually want to dedicate half an episode to her and talk about some of the work that she's done, both on the page in her book writing and also off the page out in the world, because she is an artist activist that I just have so much admiration for. And she has ties to Colorado, my home state, which is really cool. Women Who Run with the Wolves is just a masterpiece of kind of getting back to that wild self within. She has different sections and chapters that talk about different ways that we have kind of lost touch with that wild inner woman. It reawakened so many things in me. Also, my experience living in Costa Rica was a massive rewilding. I was able to very much get in touch with that messy, honest, wild, free, curious, sexy woman that lives within me. And I did that through sweaty dances out at, reggaeton and Afro beats events. I did that by, covering myself in clay earth with girlfriends and baking out in the sun and then rinsing off in the river water. I did that through doing a very, very fun and meaningful photo shoot with a woman who specializes in female empowerment and getting women to like really get in touch with their sensuality and be witnessed through it. I did it through a lot of different ways, just through the elements of being in that place. It's very intense. The rain, the sun, the heat, the moisture, it'll wring you out in a beautiful way, in a life-changing way. And so I've had these moments of getting connected to my inner wilds. And now I'm living in the city. I don't have connection to the elements the same way I used to. But I'm now realizing that my wild woman lives in the stories that I tell and in the words that I create on the page. And that is going to be my journey for the next, I don't know how long. I don't know how long this journey is going to be, because you never know how we evolve and change, but I'm giving myself this 6-month container. So well into 2026, I'm giving myself this space to see how much I can put out and how much I can get deep with and how much depth I'm willing to share with other people. So the idea, unscripted and untamed, is about getting off script, tearing up the story that we wrote for ourselves yesterday and starting fresh, kind of coming at it with a clean slate and allowing our instincts to kind of come through, whether that's creatively, whether that's through just making a fresh start in some space in our lives, or starting a new habit, or starting a new sport, or starting a new practice that just feels wilder and feels a little risky and a little edgy, and allowing that to become the guide for our most untamed selves. So, taking our lives off the page and giving ourselves a chance to be something entirely new and entirely different than who we were yesterday is where the storytelling comes into play. Because the script is the story that we write for ourselves, or the script that's written for us, societally, familially, all the things. And I have this really strong connection to storytelling and understanding the depth of why we do the things that we do. I also have a deep passion for hearing other people's stories. So part of the podcast is going to have a spotlight section. I'm going to do my own research and take some of my favorite creatives, living and dead, who I have learned from, and open up their stories to be discussed in this space. We all have different references for inspiring people and interesting people in our lives. And I want to open up the people in my life that have inspired me to you all. And I also ask that you guys share some inspiring people with me so that I could do highlights on those people. These could be iconic artists who we all know and love. This could be someone in your life who you want to feature, who you send in a submission for. The idea is to storytell and show the thread of connection that story has for all of us. And to remind ourselves that it was never really about the results. It's never about the end photo that a photographer takes. It's not about the finished painting that a painter produces. It's never about just the gorgeous architecture and design of a space. It's about the process. It's what that person went through to create something like this. Now, I've worked with a few different artists who I've gotten to support their storytelling and help them, kind of framework their narrative so that they have a deeper story to connect their potential clients to, or buyers, or whoever's consuming their art. And that's been some of my favorite work, because I've noticed something about artists. Half of them are ready to tell you everything. You just have to ask the right questions and they'll spill their guts. They're really willing to go deep. And then the other half of artists have this mentality, which, no judgment, there's a lot of different ways to approach your work, but they don't want to share anything. They don't want to give any messaging away to the consumers of their art, whether it's music or visual art. And I find that so interesting, because I've tried to dig a little bit deeper with some of these artists, and they just say, you know what, that's up for interpretation. I'm not going to put my ideas of what the symbology is onto the consumer. That's up for them to make on their own. And I don't actually want to give too much away, because art is up for interpretation. And I mean, I kind of love that. I do think like literature is also like this. And I think there's a really great value in letting people just have an experience with their work instead of telling them exactly what to feel. But no matter what these artists' approaches are, there's always the journey that it took them to get to the end result. And that is always going to be, I think, the most compelling thing about someone's work. I would argue that people don't buy art for just the visual aesthetics of it, or even how it makes them feel. Yes, they do that, but I would say that even more than that is buying a piece of the artist's story. And so that's what I want to bring into this podcast, is highlighting stories that I think are very compelling and surprising and weird and ridiculous and incredible and inspiring. Stories are our bridge to connection. Really, a podcaster is someone who tells stories and shares and interviews and creates. And that's why I think this genre is so important. And I think it's so amazing that anyone can get a little mini mic and set up their camera or set up their audio and create something. And at first I was like, damn, girl, like everyone and their mom has a podcast. I don't really think I need to contribute to this oversaturated space. What's the point? And then I realized that that's ridiculous. And I have all the tools to create something and to contribute. And I am here to make space for myself and for others. And what a dope way to make space in this format. Because at the end of the day, stories are the bridge between two worlds. And I think that there's especially now more than ever, when there's a lot of divisiveness, stories are what we can come back to and appreciate together. I was reading an NPR article that talks about how story connects us on a cerebral emotional level. So, this is what they had to say. When we when we read, brain networks involved in deciphering or imagining another person's motives and the areas involved in guessing and what will happen next are activated. Imagining what drives other people, which feeds into our predictions, helps us see a situation from different perspectives. It can even shift our core beliefs when we come back out of the story world and into regular life. If you're a listener, listening to a story, a podcast, a film, listeners keep thinking about the story and then talk to others about it, which reinforces the memory and over time can drive a broader change in attitudes. So basically, your brain is saying, I'm trying to make your brain similar to mine in areas that really capture the meaning, the situation, the schema, the context of the world. So there's actually, so physiologically, we're connecting. Our brain waves are connecting. Our empathy is opened up and we are relating to each other. And it sounds so obvious and so simple, but I really feel like in this time that we're in, and I would argue that any time in humanity, because there has always been challenges and deep rifts in humanity, as seen in war and religious differences and political divisiveness, we can always rely on listening and sharing with each other. And I'm just an advocate for that. I've actually always been kind of the mediator in situations. I'm the middle child, so naturally I'm in the middle. I'm trying to balance the scales. That's just always how it's been. I'm also the daughter of two middle children, and I've just noticed when conflict arises, whether it's in families or relationships or even a work situation, I'm the one who's trying to help each person see the other side. To be honest, I've kind of stepped away from that mediating role the last few years because I don't always think that's my responsibility to take that on and to be putting myself in the middle like this. Completely honest, it's exhausting. So it's not always the right space for me to offer my services in. But I could add that to my list of writing services. Mediator, professional, emotional mediator. But yeah, but it's like natural for me to try to see both sides and understand. When we make space for listening and sharing, we can quite literally build bridges to deeper understanding and to connection. I've been living in Latin America for 5 years. I came to this part of the world with a really, really basic understanding of the language. I came to this part of the world with not well equipped with what their cultural practices are and how people communicate and how things get done and how people move through the world. I have learned so much by observing and listening and watching and asking taxi drivers, people in restaurants, cafes that I visit, people in the streets, people at parties, by living with roommates, by creating a publication that was all about storytelling and uplifting stories about people who lived entirely different lives than me, whose upbringing I couldn't even relate to because of how different it was than my own. And it's been probably the most important thing that I've done in my life is made space for different. Make space for different. Make space for someone who thinks differently than you. Make space for someone who acts differently than you would in a situation. And instead of it triggering you or making or pissing you off, like try to understand that there's difference all around us. We want to live in a homogenous melting pot of the sameness. Absolutamente no. I mean, look, I know there's people that do want that. I'm a US citizen, okay? I know what's going on over there. I know the rhetoric. But I value difference. And it has been the thing that has allowed me to be more human than anything else. It has been the gift that I've received because I've lived abroad. It's been the challenge that I've been initiated into. And it's the thing that drives me to continue to have conversations. So I'm going to challenge myself on this podcast to invite people who think differently than me, who have a different story, and I want to share space with them. I it's hard because all my favorite people that I want to interview are I vibe with them and I align with them so much. So I'm like, how do we frame that? But at the end of the day, actually, the people that I feel close to and inspired by and curious to know more about who I want to feature here, I'm actually very different than them. They've grown up in different countries than me. They have different careers, they have different approaches, they have different rhetoric, they have different ideas, they have a different vision for themselves. So I would actually say that even though they ignite me and I'm like, ooh, I'm curious about this person, I think it is the differences that gets me excited. Like for example, I don't have any American friends here in Mexico City, and I had how many American friends did I have in Costa Rica? I don't know. I don't think I had any. I think I had one or two connections. My closest friends were European and Latina. And it's because I've always sought out differences. So the spotlight storytelling aspect is going to be make space for different. So part of my going off script journey is to get back onto the page and share weekly musings, poetry, reflections, and stories with you all on my Substack. Just started an Adlib with Liv Substack. If you don't know Substack, it's an awesome platform. It's becoming the new social media, but it's for longer form content. It's all about writing and language. There's incredible creators on the platform. Young Pueblo, for example, amazing storyteller, amazing poet. And it's a really great space to kind of get off the visual overwhelm of like Instagram, TikTok, all of that, and to tap into a space that's really dedicated to writing, also reading. So check out my Adlib with Liv. It's going to be in the YouTube bio, so you can just click and subscribe right there. And I wanted to share my first post with you guys here because it's always nice to just be a listener. It's like a more poetic synopsis of what I'll be sharing on the Substack and also here on the podcast because they're very intertwined. As a nostalgic Cancerian 90s girly, I crave connection and intimacy, not just any form of socialization. Instant anxiety, anyone? No, I yearn for conversations that burn into the night, long after the candle wicks flicker into darkness. I crave those chats that blossom open, past judgment and into expansion, where trust is brewed between two people with clay cups of cacao in hand. I prefer whispers over shouts in a crowd, and conversations that provoke rather than pacify. I crave long-form content amongst flashes of 30-second reels in a world of Wi-Fi and AI, screens and emails. I crave handwritten letters, record players, and paperback books. I believe in experiencing one thing at a time, a blog, a poem, a chapter, a podcast. I choose listening over consuming. I call it reading with intention rather than scanning for content. Story as connection. Story is our common denominator. It's the meeting ground between worlds. It's the thing that forges connection between opposites and mediates empathy between tense political parties, rigid religious systems. Story is the reason we go to the theater, we fall in love with literature, we gather with friends. It's the reason we stay invested in the plot, in the storyline. And story is about making sense of our own experiences. Stories are what we tell ourselves on repeat, how we form our identity, and eventually those stories are meant to be ruptured, questioned, rewritten, and rewiled. I am learning that in order to be a storyteller for others, I must also share my own. Because a reliable narrator opens up about her personal expression. She exists on the edge of the knife between vulnerability and liberation. The reliable narrator has a responsibility to be witnessed while the story still unfolds before the script is finished, before the idyllic storybook ending and perfectly packaged soliloquies. My story includes the mess and the magic, the wrongs and the wisdom. So here is where I will be sharing narratives from my personal life, anecdotes from building a new life in Mexico City, navigating language, culture, and the creative self, poems that evoke and reveal my heart in process, and the musings of a single 35-year-old who has deprioritized romance with men and opted for writing my own fairy tale, with pleasure and purpose driving the plot. As a curious soul on a plight for honoring my most authentic voice, both creatively and professionally, I will share my process of spilling my soul on the page while making space for that divine love that I trust will open up to me the more I open up to the world around me and within me. You know the type of love that pours over the page and across the floor, that slips you into surrender, leaving you face up vulnerable and asking for more. Okay, the last thing I want to say about storytelling is about your story. I want to invite you to explore your own narrative, your own inner dialogue that carries you through each day. And I want to invite you to explore where you continue to follow the script as it's pre-written and where there's space for you to go a little off script. Change the way you talk to yourself. Shift a bad habit into a beneficial habit, skip the doom scroll sesh or even consuming the news first thing in the morning, and take a pen out and jot down your deep, dark, fucked up inner thoughts for 10 minutes. Write about your disturbing dream that you just had. Write about a wish that you have for the day. Write about something you just read that really spoke to you. Write about something you really want to do in the next year. Process that. Process a conversation that you need to have with somebody that might be kind of edgy and you're not sure about it. Shift one thing that just gives you a little bit of room to do things differently. And notice maybe how that little shift opens something up in you, gets you to address something that was kind of buried beneath and needs to be unearthed or excavated a little bit more. And for the next episode, I'm going to talk about what that's looked like for me, what excavating truth looks like for me at this phase of my life, and how that's resulting in more creative expression and work. And I'm so excited to have you here. Thanks for joining me for another episode. And I hope you have a little more insight into what to expect with this podcast and the conversations that we're going to create here together. I definitely want to include you, the listeners, into these conversations. So if there's anything that comes up, questions or inquiries or things you want to chat about or do a deeper dive into, comment. If you're on YouTube, you can comment on the video or send me an email or a DM, and I will be waiting to connect with you. And this space is, as always, a place for sharing and for brutal honesty. There's going to be so much of that. It's going to be raw. Let's fucking go. Talk to you soon. Thanks for joining Adlib with Liv.